Good morning, everybody. Thank you for spending your morning with us. I am Kara Poli, and I'm going to be the presenter today. I have Nicole Martinez helping me with the questions box. Before we get started today, I do have a poll I want to launch to kind of find out who's with us today and what we're working with, so that I can tailor my information to you guys. If you've sat in on this training before, today is going to be just a little bit different. I've added some stuff. So if you have a coworker that might benefit from it, feel free to email them real quick. Otherwise, here is the poll. If you will answer based on your utility allowance knowledge, then we will get started in just a couple of minutes. If you're just logging in, we've got a poll going right now so that we can see where everybody's starting from today. If you are looking for the handouts on your side panel for your GoToWebinar information, it kind of tells you the dashboard, the audio, that sort of stuff, and then it's got the questions box, and then it says handouts 3 of 5. That's what you're going to want to click. If you cannot find that, you won't really need it during the training. You can email me and I can send that to you afterwards, and you can just take notes during the training. But the handouts are there on that sidebar there towards the bottom right above the chat box. And it says handouts 3 of 5. So hopefully that helps the folks in the questions box that aren't able to find that yet. We've got a few people still logging in. If you will answer the poll question. All right, I'm gonna leave it open for just a few more seconds. Then we'll get started. All right, so I'm gonna close the poll. It looks like most folks here are familiar with utility allowances but need to learn some more. We have a few folks that are new to utility allowances and a few folks that are pros. So definitely feel free to ask your questions in the questions box. And Nicole will be fielding those. And if she's able to answer it in the chat or in the questions box, she will do that. If it is something that would benefit the whole group, she will let me know that there's a question, and we will answer that, out loud through the webinar. Again, my name is Kara Poli. I'm the presenter today, and I've got Nicole Martinez here helping me with the questions box. We are going to do things a little bit differently today. We've got a few things that I've added in based off of previous trainings, responses, and questions, and what they'd like to see more. So hopefully that benefits everybody. This will be posted to the sorry, I was trying to make sure this was recording. Yes, it is recording. Okay, so this will be posted to our YouTube channel probably tomorrow or Monday, kind of depending on how quickly everything downloads and gets working. And you will be able to reference it, share it with colleagues, look at the handout, any sort of information that you need. But everything we are talking about is available on our website or on the HUD website. So there's nothing, secret or foreign here. So this is utility allowances training, and there were some minor updates for this month. So if you've taken it before, it should be just a little bit different. The purpose of this training is to provide guidance for calculating a utility allowance under the department's multifamily program. So if you have another funding source, I'm not speaking to that funding source. I'm only talking about the department programs. The department will cite non-compliance and or not approve a utility allowance, and if it is not calculated in accordance with the requirements of the TAC Section 10.614, Treasury Regulation 1.42-10, and Chapter 18 of the 8823 Audit Guide. Owners are required to comply with the provisions of the above sections, as well as any existing federal or state program guidance. We do have a frequently asked section about utility allowances that myself and the UA team went through, and we did lots of kind of adjusting and kind of revamping those questions and answers to be more beneficial to you guys. So that's available on our website. That link is there. Once you're able to get the handout, you can copy and paste that, or you can go to our website under the compliance section and go to the frequently asked questions. For utility allowance information, you will go to the link that you see at the top of the screen. This is our department website, and it's under the compliance section under utility allowances. We did recently update the utility allowance questionnaire for applications. So if that is in your job purview, you will want to download the new questionnaire. It's a minor adjustment. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit, but it was an adjustment made because we've got a lot of programs that we're operating under the MFDL or the multifamily direct loan umbrella. So we needed a little more information on that questionnaire with regards to that. The utility allowance team is myself, Nicole Martinez, and Carolyn Metzger, and our emails are all listed there. We are always happy to answer your questions. We would much rather have you reach out before you do a submission than wait until we have to return a submission or something's missing. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we're seeing today that are kind of becoming, I don't want to use the word problem, but for lack of a better term, and a thesaurus, I am going to use the word problem. So some of the issues that we're seeing on submissions are what we're going to talk about in this one today that I've added in. And that's based off of what we as a UA team have seen. We've also got Virginia Tucker helping us with some of the utility allowances. So if you start seeing approval letters from her, that's why she is learning how to do this. So there are a couple of other places you can find information. One is our website, and then the other place is the HUD utility allowance webpage. And so that is where you'll find our website's where you'll find the questionnaire and the notice to residents, that sort of stuff. And the HUD website is where you will find the HUD model. And you don't want to use the HTML HUD model. You want to use the Excel-based HUD model when you're doing these. You want to be sure you download that. For the most part, everybody does that, so that's not a huge issue. But we do like to see where you guys get your numbers, because if we have a discrepancy, we're going to reference what you submit versus what we have. And sometimes it's a tax issue, or sometimes it's a math issue, or a misunderstanding of the rate sheet, sometimes on our end, sometimes on your end. It just kind of depends, but it's good to have that backup to look at. Again, these forms are updated periodically. Please make sure you're checking websites regularly to make sure you're using the most current version of the required documents. I do periodically still get an application questionnaire that is more than 5 years old. And I know that because our font changed. And so that is kind of something, it does change for purpose. It's not just something that we think it looks, it needs to be prettier or anything like that. We do add things to it that help us with the reviews and help us limit the number of questions we're going to come back to you guys with. Our goal is to have the information that we need to process your utility allowance whenever you submit it, so that we know you guys are busy and we want to get these out to you guys as efficiently as we possibly can. There is an open line of communication, so if you have questions or we need other stuff, we will reach out. Otherwise, the questionnaires and the HUD model and the submission requirements should have everything we need. There's some definitions and terms that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about building types, and I've got some HUD documents that we're going to reference. The Power to Choose website is a big deal for folks using HUD models, written local estimates, energy consumption models that are in deregulated areas. But I do have to tell you that recently we have found that there are some zip codes that are showing up on the Power to Choose website that are also in a municipality where that is the provider. So if you're in, Brady, Denton, Granbury, for example, those are the three most recently that I have discovered, you need to check with your provider. And for those of you that are preparing utility allowances for properties, what you need to do is maybe ask the owner or the property manager for a copy of the bill that their clubhouse gets. That's going to tell you, do they have a municipality that provides it, or is it truly a Power to Choose provider? The component charges are the actual cost associated with the billing of a residential utility. These are the rates, fees, taxes, et cetera. The Multifamily Direct Loan Program, or MFDL, are funds provided through the Home Program, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, National Housing Trust Fund, repayments from the Tax Credit Assistance Program, or TCAP-RF, Home American Rescue Plan, or Home ARP, or any other program available through the department, local political subdivision, or administrating agency for multifamily development that require a utility allowance. A renewable source is going to be energy produced from energy property described in the section 42 and 45. That's going to be something that's a little out of my purview to answer questions on, but I can do some research and get you answers if that's the case. We do have a handful of folks that use solar energy, so I've learned a little bit about that recently. Sub-metered utilities are going to be utilities that are purchased through a local utility provider by the building owner, where the resident is then billed directly by the owner or a third-party billing company. This must be based on the resident's actual consumption that the utility and not for that utility, and not an allocation method or ratio utility billing system. And the rate at which the owner is billed cannot exceed the rate incurred by the building owner for that utility, or the rate. So when you bill your tenants for water or sewer, for example, you can't bill them using residential rates when the owner's bill is based on commercial rates or multifamily rates. So you need to be sure that that third-party billing company is using the right rate plan, and they probably are, because they're probably using the actual owner bills. And you need to be sure that when you're having an energy consumption model done, or you're doing a HUD model, that you're also using the right rate plan, because that can affect one way or the other the utility allowance. The utility allowance is an estimate of the expected monthly cost of any utility for which a resident is financially responsible, other than phone, cable, or internet. The utility provider is the company that provides the residential utility service. We will also call this group the provider. And like I said earlier, if you are unsure of who the provider is, check the property paid accounts, like the clubhouse or the maintenance shop or vacant units. If it reverts back into Denton City Utilities, then you know, even though your zip code shows up on Power to Choose, your tenants probably can't use the Power to Choose website. They probably have to use the City of Denton. So that's something that you guys will need to check. There are some required forms, and we're a little bit later in this going to go through how to complete the utility allowance questionnaires, because that's been a request on previous training, so I want to be sure we get that addressed. The utility allowance questionnaire is required. The resident posting, either an annual review or a change notice, is required. The previous year's approved UA is required. And then all backup for the current methodology request is required. And we do need to see the rate sheet, the engineering model, the written local estimate letter, all the things that go with it. And we're going to talk about those things here shortly. And you can find these forms on our utility allowance section of the department website. So how to submit your utility allowance request. All submissions must be uploaded to the Development's Compliance Monitoring Tracking System. That's the CMTS account. When you upload, please be sure to choose utility allowance documents in the type drop-down menu. In the description box, please identify the method. Don't just say 2023 UA request, say 2023 ECM update or written local estimate review, something to that effect, so that we know from that what we're looking at. Is it a change? Is it an annual review, that sort of thing. If it is an initial request or annual review, you can also add that in the title. In the TDHCA contact drop-down menu, please select utility allowance. There are some folks that still select me or Carolyn or Nicole or another monitor, and those don't get reviewed. We try to email you back and say, hey, you uploaded this incorrectly, please upload it correctly. However, we get a lot of uploads from the CMTS system, and so we may miss one. It may be while we're preparing for on-site monitoring reviews, and so we're unable, we miss it in one of the pre-on-site documentation uploads. So you want to be sure that you're selecting that right contact. And the reason for that is we use that contact as the method for tracking submissions of utility allowance reviews, and we use that to create a log, and that helps us to make sure that nothing gets missed. If the submission is not uploaded as outlined above, it will not be received by the utility allowance team, and the development may be cited with non-compliance. So if you 2 months ago uploaded a utility allowance to me and never uploaded it to utility allowance, and you've got a monitoring review next week and you didn't submit for 2022, you've got a utility allowance issue that's going to be cited under that monitoring review. So it's imperative that this get uploaded correctly so that it can be tracked and completed timely. There are 7 different types of methodologies that the department allows or sees. The 2 that are not department issued are going to be the rural housing or rural development as monitored by the USDA division. And then there are HUD issued utility allowances. So if you have project-based Section 8, city home funds, county home funds, project-based vouchers, public housing, that sort of thing, you're probably going to get a utility allowance schedule from HUD, and that's going to govern the other units at your property within that building. The ones that the department does have a hand in are the Public Housing Authority methodology, written local estimate, energy consumption model, actual use method, and HUD utility schedule model. So those are the 5 that we're going to talk about today. We're going to hit on a couple things with the rural housing and the HUD issued, but we're not going to go into super details on those because I don't know how those cookies are made. I only know what they look like when they're finished. So for the Public Housing Authority method, this is the utility allowance established by the applicable PHA for the Housing Choice Voucher Program. If the PHA provides vouchers to your tenants but is not the most applicable PHA, you would not be able to use the UA from that PHA. So if you're in Hutto, you may get vouchers from the Round Rock Housing Authority, but the Round Rock Housing Authority does not prepare a utility allowance for Hutto. So you cannot use that utility allowance for your property. You're going to have to pick a different methodology. If the Public Housing Authority publishes different schedules based on building type, the owner is responsible for implementing the correct schedule based on the development's building types. In the event the PHA publishes a UA schedule specifically for energy efficient units and the owner desires to use such a schedule, the owner must demonstrate that the buildings meet the PHA specifications for energy efficiency once every 5 years. And that's going to need to be maintained on the property so that when we have a monitoring review, you can show us that that's being maintained and that is applicable. If the PHA utility schedule lists any flat fees for any utilities, those flat fees must be included in the calculation of the utility allowance if the resident is responsible for that utility. And I think it's Lubbock Housing Authority maybe that has a gas and electric bill, but it doesn't say what they are. It just has 2 amounts, like it has 7-22. So you've got to call the housing authority and find out what goes to what. Don't just assume that the 22 is the electric fee because it's higher and it keeps you safer. You need to be sure you're using the right amount. Well, while it may keep you safe from a gross rent issue, it's not going to keep you safe from a utility allowance issue of noncompliance. If the PHA schedule reflects a rounded amount, then the PHA method of rounding should be used. So if they rounded down, that's fine. If it's on that PHA schedule, that's what you're going to use. We see some folks that say, well, that's wrong. We need to round up. That's not how it works with the PHA schedules. We're going to default to their rounding method. For Public Housing Authority, the methodology must be used for voucher holders from that PHA unless the building is HUD regulated or has MFDL funds. If the development is located in an area that does not have a municipal, county, or regional housing authority that publishes a utility allowance schedule for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, owners must select an alternative methodology unless the buildings are located in the published Housing Choice Voucher Service area of a council of government, the department's Housing Choice Voucher Program, and those were all recently uploaded and updated. Another PHA, which publishes a separate utility allowance schedule specific to the development's location. Annual review by the department is not required unless there is a change to the utilities the resident is financially responsible for, or if you're switching. So if you were approved in 2022 with a HUD model and now it's 2023 and you're like, wait, I don't need to do a HUD model, it's a regulated area, I'm just going to use the Housing Choice Voucher UA schedule, you would have to submit for approval for that. If your development has home ARP funds, you must submit initially for approval to use the PHA schedule, and then you must submit annually and post for that home ARP requirement to use the PHA schedule. Here is what the Austin Housing Authority schedules look like. These are the 2022 schedules. You can see they've got different apartments types. They've got an effective date. So within 90 days of that effective date, these would have been applicable. And I'm guessing they've probably released new ones for 2023. So if you're in Austin and you use this method, you should probably check on that. Here is the website that we use to look at, do they have a housing choice voucher program? You can see here that there are some that say combined, and that means they have low rent and housing choice voucher. But this one, like the Housing Authority of Alba, they only have low rent. So if Alba put out a PHA schedule, you would not be able to use that at your property in Alba. You would have to pick a different methodology. That's what I just said. So what if a development is in an area that does not have a PHA, but another PHA serves the area? In that case, the PHA that serves the area must issue a utility allowance for the specific area in which the development is located in order to use that methodology. So in this example, the Denton Housing Authority develops and issues a utility allowance for the city of Louisville. So they've done a utility allowance schedule or utility allowance study for the city of Louisville. So if you're in Louisville, you could use this one. But if it was the Denton Housing Authority and it just said Denton on the utility or service and it didn't say city of Louisville, you would not be able to use it, even though you might get vouchers from that housing authority. That is all I have for the PHA method. Are there any questions, Nicole? All right. So Nicole said there are no questions. If you have anything come up or you think of later, feel free to type it in the box and she can answer that, or we can circle back. It's not a problem at all. So the next one we're going to talk about is written local estimate. The department has very little to do with this one. What we're going to do is look at it, we're going to acknowledge it, and then when you go through a monitoring review, they're going to look at it to make sure that it meets all the requirements. The written local estimate method, the estimate must come from the local utility provider. It must be signed by the provider's representative. It must include all component charges for providing the utility service, and it must include all items which contribute to the utility. For example, an estimate from an electric provider must include all items which are reflected on the electric bill for the resident. If the estimate does not include the air conditioning, it is not an acceptable estimate and may result in non-compliance during the development's next monitoring review. Sometimes we will catch that when you submit, and we haven't had this happen in quite some time, but we did have it. It was, I believe, the city of San Antonio that stopped including air conditioning on their written local estimates. It's going to make it not a valid submission. So you're going to have to either go back to that provider and say, hey, I need the air conditioning usage added in here, or you're going to have to pick a different methodology. The beginning of the 90-day notification period should be the date of the letter from the utility provider. However, a full 90-day posting is required. So if you get the letter on February 17th, you should also post within a couple days of that, and you should submit to the department within a couple days. So by February 20th, you should have gotten your letter, you should have posted to your residents, and you should have submitted to the department. I think that's perfectly reasonable. You guys need to talk to your owners, and owners, if you're on here, you need to be aware. You guys need to talk to your owners or whoever's in charge of reviewing those and make sure that they understand they have to be done timely. We have had to deny more probably in the last year for rates that are too old or for not having a full 90-day posting period than we've had to do, I think, ever before. So this is becoming a thing. You want to be sure that you are submitting, posting, and doing all the things when you receive that from the entity that developed the utility allowance or the written local estimate for this one. The department is going to acknowledge the receipt of the annual submission. However, the methodology is reviewed during monitoring reviews for the development. So you might get an acknowledgement for a written local estimate, and then a monitor is doing a monitoring review, and they find something wrong with it, or it's the wrong provider or something. And that's going to be addressed in that monitoring report for the monitoring review. For the written local estimate, you can see here that on April 21st, this property submitted. The letter from the provider is dated April 11th. You can assume that the posting was also done around that time, so that would have met that 90-day requirement. So when you submit a written local estimate, what you submit is going to look like what's on the right-hand side of your screen, and what we send back to you is going to look like what's on the left-hand side of your screen. We actually see very few of these anymore, I think. Is that right? Would you agree, Nicole? Yeah, we see a lot more of energy consumption models and HUD models anymore, but this one is still an allowable and acceptable utility allowance methodology. Are there any questions on written local estimate? Okay. Excuse me. So the next one we're going to talk about is the energy consumption model. This model must be calculated by a properly licensed mechanical engineer, and the license of the engineer must be submitted along with the model. You do not have to submit their resume. You do not have to submit a copy of our rule. You do not have to submit a copy of the IRS rules that govern utility allowances. You can, we don't need them, but you can submit them if you want to, but we must have the license of the engineer. The estimate must, at a minimum, take into consideration specific factors that include, but are not limited to, unit size, building type and orientation, design and materials, mechanical systems, appliances, characteristics of building location, and available historical data. Component charges used must be no older than those in effect 60 days prior to the beginning of the 90-day period described in 10.614F3 related to effective dates. So what that means is if you got your report on February the 17th and you didn't post and submit to the department until April 27th, you're out of that 60 days. I'm going to deny it, and you're going to have to start completely over. If you are submitting for a lease-up utility allowance and you submit and it's dated February 17th, but you submit it May 8th, we are going to deny it because the rates are older than 60 days prior to the date of the submission. When you're in a lease-up, the submission date to the department is the 90-day period start. When you have an existing property, the 90 days start with the posting, and the posting, the submission, and the engineer report should all be in the same few days. That should not be a huge gap. The beginning of the 90-day notification period should be 60 days after the end of the last 12-month period for which data was used to compute the estimate. That's on the engineer. They know that, and they usually do that. I've not seen an issue with that. Annual review is required to and will be approved by the department if compliant, or it will be denied or partially approved or partially denied, kind of depending on the other funding sources for the development. So here is kind of a quick snapshot of an energy consumption model. You can see on the left is the approval letter, and on the right is the engineer report. We're going to go through one of these in detail though. So for an engineering consumption model or an energy consumption model, you've got to submit the questionnaire, the resident posting, the engineer report, the rate sheet, and the engineer license. So let's look at what that looks like for all practical purposes. So here is the questionnaire. You can see I've put the property name, CMTS ID, the address, the funding type is housing tax credit, electric was the HUD model last year. Now we're going to do an energy consumption model. I'm getting tongue-tied, sorry guys. And so then on page 2, we're going to see that it was posted and when it's supposed to be implemented. They don't have any rural development funds. They don't have any HUD funds. They don't have home funds from another jurisdiction or the department. Building type is apartments 5+, and the resident pays for electric. So water, sewer, and trash are owner paid. Gas is not applicable. We can see that it's electric. We've got attached to this the current UA sources, so last year's approval, the new updated sources and their backup, the posted notice to resident, and then we didn't have anything that was paid to or through the owner, so I don't have a copy of a resident bill and an applicable rate sheet for the utility. We've got the information completed by whom and their contact information. This is important because if we run into a question, we're going to click that little email address right there and we're going to say, hey, you submitted a utility allowance for Pandora Springs and it's missing this. Can you please upload within 24 hours so that we can complete the review? If you don't upload, we may issue a denial depending on how close we are to the end of that 90-day period. That's what's going to govern that. But you want to check these before you just submit them to us, but then we've got our notice to residents, which is dated March 31st, which is about the same, it's the same day I did the questionnaire. And so we're telling our tenants that on June 29th, so effectively July 1st, the management of Pandora Springs is going to implement a new utility allowance. So here's what it was, here's what it's going to be. And we're going to tell them if you have a problem with it, please send a letter to this address, attention Carapoli. Y'all think I don't get letters? There's mail on my desk almost every week from your tenants. And sometimes that's how we find out you're using the wrong provider. Sometimes that's how we find out that it's a different building type than it should be. And sometimes you guys did everything right. And I write a letter back to the tenant and says they did everything right. This is an estimate. Please be conservative, yada, yada, yada. Then it's got this other required information where they can find more stuff. And then it's got the property manager information. So that's kind of what this is. Please make sure that this is completed. If you don't fill in the property information, then it doesn't do anybody any good because they've got to be able to know that this is for them. And then when we come out, if I go to a monitoring review on site and I know you're in the middle of a UA review period, I'm going to look and see if this is posted. That's just me. That's not something all monitors do. We do trust that when you guys submit it. Nicole's giving me a funny look because she always tells me I'm team too much. I just can't turn my brain off, guys. It's impossible. So we're trusting that when you guys submit this, that it is posted and it is effective. And your residents let us know when you change their rents and didn't tell them that this was there. So be sure that that's something that you guys are doing. So then we can see here that the allowances are per the letter and certifications dated March 24th. So that's pretty close to March 31st. I'll accept that. Here's the amounts. Those match what's on the utility allowance posting. And then we can see that water, sewer, and trash are property paid. So they're not included. That aligns with what we had on the questionnaire from the property. And the supporting documentation includes the engineer report, the property data worksheet, the license, and the qualifications. This is just a sample. Please do not try to use this for anything other than a sample. Here is what the letter is going to look like from the engineer. It's got a date. It's got all the information. It tells us what all they used to develop it. It's got all the component charges here, and you can see that it says air conditioning, water heating, so cooking, heating, other electric. So it lines up with what the questionnaire indicated. And it tells us that the engineer is not related to the owner and that it was using the engineer approved energy consumption model. And then it's going to be signed and the engineer's license number and all that kind of stuff would be there. So here's kind of what the data worksheet looks like. It's got the information, the property information. I'm going to look here and make sure that aligns with what the questionnaire says and what information I have about the property. If it says apartments 5+ and in years past it has been duplexes, I'm going to expect to see this marked. So if that's marked, I might return that for more information, or I might deny it because it's not correct. It's going to kind of depend on a lot of factors in that. So here's square footages, that sort of thing. Here's kind of what's paid by what and what factors are taken into account. Here is the rate information. I know Austin is not deregulated. This is just an example. And it tells me that the CenterPoint's the provider, Amigo Energy is the utility used, and it was dated 2/26/23. So then I'm going to expect to see this. So that should actually say this should say 6/26/23. We would want to see a rate sheet that aligns with the engineering consumption model that we are seeing you guys do. So we are going to look at this. So just pretend that's a 2 right there. And we're going to look at this and say, okay, well, at Amigo, they, in that zip code on power to choose, it is the right thing. They're not in Denton or Brady or Granbury where they have to use the city. They are in an area where they can truly use the power to choose. And so this rate sheet needs to be included. So if your engineer is not providing the rate sheet, they need to adjust that. And they need to provide you the rate sheet. So you need to ask for that. And then there's going to be the license from the engineer. And that is what we are going to look at with regards to the engineering consumption model. And so that had all the required items, and we didn't have to ask for anything else. We were able to issue an approval letter because everything lined up. We're going to pretend the rate sheet said 2 instead of 6 for the month. But we had what we needed. So we were able to say this is a reasonable estimate of utilities for this property, and we're going to issue a response letter. Are there any questions on energy consumption model? All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the actual use methodology. This is oh, now we have a question. What we got? Or do you want to look at it? Okay. You want me to look at it?
Yeah, I came in.
Okay. So the question is, in using the energy consumption model, do you have to include all of the attachments each year? Yes, you need to include everything that's listed right here. And you are going to have to, if it doesn't have one of these things, then we're going to send it back to you. Those engineering licenses have to be renewed. Some of them are biannually, but some of them are annually. So if it says it expires 12/31/2023 and you submit on January the 2nd of 2024, I'm going to deny that. I'm probably going to email you and say, hey, get their updated license. But we did have an instance where the engineer actually retired and the group was still using their license, that retired engineer's license. And so those did all have to be denied. So there are instances where that's important. The engineering report should be current. The rate sheet should match the engineering report. The resident posting has to be current and has to be done annually. So there's not an instance where you no longer have to submit a required item. I hope that helped answer your question. If there are any others, feel free to type them in the chat and we can take a look at them too. Oh. Okay, perfect. So the next one we're going to talk about is actual use methodology. This is an allowance based on the average of the actual use of similarly constructed and sized units in the building using actual utility data and component charges. So when we receive the required information, the department will then determine if the owner has provided the minimum information necessary to calculate using this methodology. And if it's missing something, we will communicate with the development and I'll say, hey, I didn't see your rent roll, or hey, I didn't see the rate sheet or the Excel spreadsheet of data, that sort of thing. I'll give you a reasonable amount of time to submit, and that reasonable amount of time is going to depend on how close we are to the 45-day deadline for me to review it. For the most part, I'm the one that does these at the department. So if you have questions, we can absolutely talk through it in detail. The update and all backup documentation must be submitted to the department no later than August 1st of each year. So today is July 6th. That means you have, what, 25 days to get this together and submitted if this is the methodology you want to go with. You are encouraged to submit prior to that deadline, but you must have it submitted by August 1st of each year. Once the department issues the response to the development, then the development will post to the residents, and it will be in 90 days from the date the department issued the response. So if I try to do these in the morning. So if I upload the response in the morning, I'm going to tell you that it's for rents due within 90 days, and you're going to do a posting for that 90-day mark. So if I did one today, you would tell them after August 5th or after July, August, September the 5th, these are the rates that are going to be in effect. So you're going to have to pay attention to that. And when you get these uploads, if it's a compliance person that looks at the uploads, or if it's a property person, whomever, they need to be paying close attention to these if you know you're waiting on one of these. Because I don't send a separate email, I don't call anybody, I upload it into CMTS and trust that you guys take the wheel from there. What must be provided for the actual use methodology? We need a minimum sample size of usage data for at least 5 continuously occupied units of each type, or 20% of each unit type. So if you have 80 units, I need 20%. But if you have 7 units, 5 units will suffice. If there are less than 5 units of any type, then the data for 100% of the unit type must be provided. If you have 80 units and you send in a spreadsheet with all 80 units and their data entered, I'm going to use the average of all 80 units or all of them that have been there at least a year and excluding any zeros. I'm not going to say, oh, well, let's do 20%. I'm not doing that. That's your job to do before you send it to us. You will upload the following documents into the development CMTS account using data no older than 60 days prior to the 90-day implementation period intended. So if you intend to implement it if it was the 90 days would have been today, it can't be older than 60 days from today. And you would have had to submit it 45 days prior to today. So there's a little bit of calendaring that has to happen with this. You need to upload an Excel spreadsheet listing each unit used for the sample size, the unit number, the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and square footage. We need the household's move-in date, the utility usage for each month of the 12-month period, and the component charges in place at the time of submission. All documentation obtained from the utility provider and/or copies of the actual bills, a rent roll showing occupancy as of the end of the month for the month in which the data was requested from the provider. So if you are doing this and you requested data at the end of June, you would have had to send me a rent roll as of June 30th. Documentation of the current utility allowance used by the development. That's pretty standard for all the submission requirements. So here's kind of what that looks like. You can see there's a rent roll at the back. You can see, oh, sorry, I thought my mouse fell asleep. There's a rent roll at the back. There's the questionnaire. Here's the Excel spreadsheet example. And you can see it's got the unit numbers. They've sent in 6 units. Maybe that's the 20% mark. It's got all the data. We've done the average. And then here is the average. Here's the utility allowance or the utility costs. And then here's the average monthly charge. So I'm going to send them then a letter. Well, I'm going to first review it. And then I'm going to send the owner a letter that says that the utility allowances for this bedroom size is $73 based on that information. And we will round up on these. If the submission contains all the required documentation and information, the department shall calculate the utility allowance for each bedroom size using the guidelines described below. If data is obtained for more than the sample requirement for the unit type, all data will be used to calculate the allowance. If more than 12 months of data is submitted, we are only going to use the most current 12 months. The allowance will be calculated by multiplying the average units of measure for the applicable utility for all unit types with that bedroom size. The allowance will be rounded up to the next whole dollar amount. If allowances are calculated for different utilities, each amount gets rounded up and then those get added together at the end. If the data submitted indicates 0 usage for any month, the data for that unit will not be used to calculate. And if that affects your minimum requirement, I'm going to email you and say, hey, I had to pull this one out. You need to send a new spreadsheet with all the information for these others or send me another unit. I try to be very open and have an open line of communication with the owners on these because I know they are kind of a beast, but there is a certain threshold of what is needed and what has to be required for these. So here's what the letter is going to look like. We're going to send it out. It's going to have a date, and I'm going to tell you that the following allowances are for rents effective July 27th because I sent this to you on April 28th. So that's the 90 days, April, May, May to June, June, July. Yep, didn't do that wrong. And so you can see the amounts are here. If you add those together, that's going to be your water and sewer utility allowance. If you use electric under a different methodology, you need to add that in as well. Are there any questions on actual consumption or actual use method? Okay. The HUD utility schedule model, which is another one that we see, and it's the one that you guys can do for low to no cost. You can do these in-house. You can, there's companies that do these for you, but you can do these. These are difficult in the sense that they take attention and they're detail oriented, but they are not difficult in the sense that anybody can't learn how to do them. So the HUD model and related resources can be found at that HUD website right there. Each item on the schedule must be displayed out to 2 decimal places, and the total allowance must be rounded up to the next whole dollar amount. So don't edit once you get that spreadsheet downloaded from the HUD website. Don't edit it. Don't change the formatting, that sort of thing, because then it's not going to be compliant with the requirements. The component charges used can be no older than those in effect 60 days prior to the beginning of the 90-day period, and that's the posting period. So you did your HUD model, you posted to the residents, you submitted to the department, you're doing all that. We see some people that do all of this in the same day. We see some people that do it within a week, that sort of thing. That's all acceptable, but it needs to all happen pretty closely together. The beginning of the 90-day notification period is the date entered as the form date on the HUD model. The allowance must be calculated using the Excel version available at the link above. with no changes or adjustments made other than entry of the required information needed to complete the model. In the event that the zip code or PHA code for the local PHA to the development is not listed in the location of the workbook, which we'll look at in just a second, the department will use the PHA code for the PHA that is closest in distance to that development. So if you're in the valley and your city is not in the PHA code and your zip code are not listed in the HUD model, we're going to go to that. If you're in Hidalgo County, we're going to use the Hidalgo County utility, the PHA code. So that's going to be kind of how that works. And if you're not sure how that works, reach out and we can help. If the owner elects any of the green discount options for a development, documentation to evidence that the units and the buildings meet the green discount standard as prescribed in the model is required for the initial approval and every subsequent annual approval. So if you have elected Energy Star, is that the one? Energy Star, that's a per unit requirement. So initially you need to send in all the certificates for each unit. After that, you can have a certification from your engineer that says, hey, these units are all still meeting these requirements, instead of uploading 280 certificates again. But every year that green discount has to be addressed. Do not take into consideration any costs or credits that a consumer would incur because of their actual usage. So if it says on the rate sheet that they get a $100 discount, if they don't use more than 2,000 kilowatt hours, you don't use that. That's a benefit to them if they pick that rate plan, but that's not something to take into account with regards to the utility allowance. During the annual review, the department will complete a HUD model and issue an approval, a partial approval, or a denial. The HUD model will be attached to the approval letter. Here is the website again. This is the same one we used to find out, is there an applicable housing authority? And now we're going to use it to find out the PHA code here. So that's what we're going to use if the zip code is not present. And now we're going to look at an actual HUD model. So for the location tab of the HUD model, you can see the tabs here at the bottom. You will enter the zip code of the development. If the zip code is not available, you will enter the PHA code. You will then enter the property name in the next box, or the name of the housing authority or city. State should remain Texas, and the date is going to be the date that you're completing the form. The climate data is going to automatically populate based on the zip code or PHA code that's entered in the first box. The data should not be changed for any reason. So you ignore everything where below climate data. Don't edit any of those, don't click, don't add anything, don't take anything out. So to obtain the rates for an area when the area is deregulated, you will visit the Power to Choose website and enter the zip code. If no plans are available, then the rates must be obtained from the provider for the area. If you're in a zip code that also has a provider of a municipality that requires that entities in the city limits use the municipality provider, you need to use the municipal provider. So those of you that are submitting utility allowances, you need to get with those property managers, property owners, whatever, and make sure that your location does not have a municipal utility provider. There are a lot of areas that this is not a thing, but we have found a handful where this has become an issue. You will then click View Results, and then you will select the rate plan to be used for the HUD model. You're going to want to download the fact sheet. That's going to tell you that's the rate sheet or the EFL. And that's going to tell you the information you need to know. This is what that's going to look like. This is the data that's going to be used on the tariffs tab of the HUD model. If the TDSP pass-through charges are not on the EFL chosen, then you must obtain them from TDSP. There's usually a link to click when that's the case, but you can also find them relatively easily. If you're not sure how to find them, reach out and I can give you a link, or you can use the link that's in this spreadsheet or in this presentation. If there is not an effective date on the rate sheet, see the effective date? You cannot use it for the HUD model. We have no way to determine when that rate was effective if you do not use a rate sheet with an effective date on it. So it's got to be on the rate sheet. So here is the detail of it. You can see we've got an energy charge where we are ignoring this information and we are using this information. So the energy charge is 2 cents per kilowatt hour. The pass through from TDSP is a 4.2359 cents per kilowatt hour. The monthly charge is $4.39. There's a one-time charge of $14.99 charged. We're not going to include that. That is a one-time setup fee for persons that choose this rate plan. We are not going to include that in the utility allowance. So if you need the TDSP rates, you can see those here on the PUC website. There's a long link right there, and that is going to tell you what the rates. It's about 8 pages long, and you need to go to the very last page to get the totals. And that's what this is going to look like. These are the 5 providers in the area. There are some zip codes that are going to say, is it Encore or is it Texas, New Mexico Power? Well, I don't know. You need to look at a bill for the property and see who the provider is. So that's not the electric company. That's the person that the electric company bought the utility from is what I'm referencing there. So you need to make sure that this aligns with your billing for the property. This is one of the things that we would catch when a resident complains and they send us a copy of their bill. If I look at it and say, okay, it's got this instead of this, you didn't do your due diligence as an owner, as a manager, as a utility allowance preparation company, so that's going to be an issue. These have to be included. These are required for everything. So you've got this minimum rate, and then you've got the monthly rate. So those are going to be included in the HUD models that you're developing. So let's complete the tariffs tab. The date is going to be the date you're completing the HUD model. The utility name, rate name, and effective date are all going to go in that box that you see there. So this sample is the same all year. So January to December, because there is no separate summer rate, but there is in our next example. So if you are in an area that has that, stay tuned. The monthly TDSP charge has gone here in the monthly charge. The next one, we're going to put remainder because it's all one rate for the whole block. And then we're going to put the cost of the rate block. Because there's no winter versus summer, we're going to leave winter blank. Extra charges is where the TDSP and provider extra charges would go. And then taxes, you would include the state electric tax, population tax, and city tax. Some cities charge a franchise fee. Some utility providers have an additional percentage added for other things. Those are all things you would get from the rate plan. So that's all things that might differ from this clear-cut example for your utility allowance. So you want to be sure that you're not just saying, oh, well, Kara said that we only use taxes in this box. If there's an extra percentage, you would add that here. If there's an extra fee, you would add it in extra charges. So you want to be sure you're using whatever the provider bills back to the tenants. So let's look at these two things side by side. Oh, thought I made that bigger. So you can see here, we've got the energy charge of 2 cents per kilowatt hour. We've converted that into cents. We got our pass-through rate of 4.2359 cents, and we've converted that into dollars. Our TDSP customer charge is $4.39. We've got that there, and then we've got our taxes. So for electric, we are done. We've included everything from this electricity facts label or rate sheet. Now we're going to do gas for this area. So we need to look at the gas bill, and some of these are harder to find, so you might be easier to call the provider and get them to send you a current rate sheet. But the natural gas costs have to be obtained from the provider's website. There's no regulated or deregulated for this. You're going to use the customer charge and the commodity charge plus anything else. So this has a gas cost adjustment, a rate case expense recovery, and a tax adjustment. So those are things that you would have to talk to the provider and obtain. And here, this provider puts it out on a website. The whole thing is this 47,750 cents per CCF. So let's put this in the HUD model. We've got the utility name, the rate name, and the effective date. We've got the measurement units, and this is important because if your gas is not billed on therms, then you need to change it to CCF. You need to change it to whatever is applicable to your property. Otherwise, you're going to get a really weird utility allowance, or you're going to get one that seems reasonable, But when I send you mine back or Nicole sends you her approval, you're going to have a different number and you're going to say, well, where's the difference? And we're going to say, well, you picked the wrong measurement units for gas or whatever. For this one, the gas does not have a different summer versus winter rate. Some will, some won't. So we're going to leave that January to December. The monthly charge is that $17.39 that was on that rate sheet that we looked at on the slide before. Since we don't have a summer and winter rate difference, we're going to put everything in the summer block. We're going to say remainder and then the cost, and that was outlined on that rate sheet that we saw on the slide before. And then the extra charges are what was on that, that little pop-up, that little yellow and green pop-up, and that's the 47 cents amount that we've entered in here. And then taxes are also going to be included as they were with electricity. So you can see here kind of what that all looks like together. There's the customer charge and the commodity charge. Here is the extra charges, and then we've got our taxes. So that gives us our total for gas. So for this one, the gas tariff is complete. And then the utility allowance for water and sewer supply. So this is an example out of Houston. Houston does a multifamily water rate. So you would need to be sure that you're using the right thing under this. So if you are billing back water, you're probably getting billed this way instead of, or if your tenants are in a duplex and they set up their own water bill, these are probably the rates that they're using. So you get these from the provider's website. If you can't find them, you want to email them and ask if they can provide that to you. Email is going to be the best course of action. There are some small municipalities that will not. Email is just foreign to them and they don't put them on their website. So you do have to get those by phone, but please document who you talk to when you talk to them and what the rates are in detail. So now we're going to put this in our HUD model. So the utility name and the effective date, it's going to be the city of Houston, and then the effective date. If the rate plan doesn't have an effective date with this, it would be the date you obtained it from the website. The measurement units, you would want to change this because there are different measurement units for water. So most of the time it's gallons, but that's not always the case. The monthly charge is the base charge for water. The size of blocks is going to be one size. So if it says that the first 1,000 gallons are included in the minimum, and then 3,000 are billed at this, and then 5,000 are billed at this, you would do it that way. But for this example, everything is the same rate. So we're going to put remainder, and then we're going to convert our $4.58 charge per 1,000 gallons into a per gallon charge. You'll know if you don't do this right because you'll have a $700 utility allowance when you get to the last tab. So that's an easy catch. And sometimes we even forget to do it, but you can just have Excel do the work for you and put that in there, or you can do it ahead of time and just add your extra decimals. Taxes are not generally charged on water. If there are extra fees, you would put those there. If there are taxes charged by your municipality or your water provider, you would want to add those there on the tariff part. Excuse me. So, what is that? Oh, now we're doing sewer. So we can see here on sewer, the minimum charge is $10.48 and it's $6.66 per 1,000 gallons. So now we're going to put that on the sewer tariff page or tariff section. City of Houston, April 1st. We're using gallons as our unit of measure. The monthly base rate is $10.48 and the block size is remainder because everything is one rate. And that is $6.66 per 1,000 gallons. So to convert that, it's 0.00666 per gallon. If the rate sheet indicates that there is a cap for sewer, we will use the cap. Sometimes it'll say that anything over 20,000 gallons of sewer is not billed, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a little different. If you run into an issue, let us know and we are happy to help with that. But most of the time you're going to be able to put the rates in, and when you get to the end of the HUD model, you'll be able to see if any of your unit sizes went over that cap. If they didn't, no harm, no foul, you just move on. If they did, reach out and we'll tell you how to address that. So then the next page is the building characteristics tab. You're going to tell it what unit type you've got. So if you have a fourplex, that's single family attached. If you have a regular traditional apartment building that's got 12 units, you've got 3 floors, you've got, you know, a breezeway and everything comes off that breezeway, that's going to be larger apartment buildings 5+. If you've got duplexes, that's going to be single family attached. If you've got individual houses, that's going to be single family home. The schedule type should not change. The green discount is only going to be applicable if you meet one of those requirements, and you're going to have had an engineer involved, you're going to have certifications, you're going to have all that information before you submit. So you will have to have that included, or we will not approve a green discount on your utility allowance. You want to be sure that the errors, or that your utility or service and the fuel source are selected correctly. You can see here that space heating is electric resistance, cooking is natural gas, other electric and air conditioning are always going to be electric, water heating is natural gas, and water and sewer the tenant pays. So a lot of times we see that you guys put electric resistance under the fuel source for space heating, but then when you get to the last page, you delete resistance and leave heat pump. If you don't tell it the right thing, it won't populate correctly. So you want to be sure that this matches, and we're going to make sure this matches what's on the questionnaire. So if you don't tell us the fuel source for space heating, we may reach out. We're probably going to look at last year's approval and see what it was, and if it was answered correctly on the questionnaire and we don't have a reason to question it, we're probably going to move forward with that. Here's what the last page looks like. You can clear out the data that does not apply. So in this case, space heating was resistance, so I did not need the heat pump amounts. You want to make sure you don't delete an applicable line. If you remove air conditioning, you will not have an accurate utility allowance, and we will approve one using your rate plan, but ours will have air conditioning included. I know there are some HUD programs that don't require you include air conditioning, but our stuff requires air conditioning is included if the tenants pay for air conditioning. The bottom number in that yellow line is the applicable utility allowance for the unit size. And you have 5 days from when we issue this to email us back and say, hey, Nicole, I don't agree with this. I think we're supposed to be heat pump. I talked to my maintenance guy, yada, yada. Or, hey, water heating is not supposed to be included because we have a boiler system and we pay that. And Nicole is going to say, okay, well, in the questionnaire, it didn't indicate that. And last year, it didn't indicate that. So can we get an owner certification, or your email will suffice, or something? We're going to make those updates, but you only have 5 days for that. So don't just sit on this and wait until the end of that 90 days. You want to be sure that you're reaching out to us immediately if there's an issue on your issued HUD model. We're going to do another one, and this one's going to have some different rate plans for summer versus winter, and it's going to have some different blocks. So here is our location tab. We've got our zip code. We're in San Antonio, Texas now versus Houston. So we're in a regulated area now. We've got our date that this was completed on, and then our climate data, which we're going to leave alone because it's based on our zip code. To obtain the rates for the area when regulated, you're going to visit the provider's website. So in San Antonio, you'd go to the CPS website. If you're unable to relatively quickly find the rates, you can use, there's usually a search engine at the top, and you can search rates. Please do not send in a current bill and say that you just used the rates from the current bill because you couldn't find the provider. And then you have to use a rate plan that is available to all of your tenants. If you are in San Antonio, do not upload residential all electric rate. That says available only to all electric homes with an active CPS Energy account for this rate prior to June 2006. Well, it's 2023 and you've got a new property. They did not have accounts prior to June 2006. So you've got to use the residential electric rate. We don't see that very often, but every once in a while, one of those will slip in. So here's what that looks like. They actually updated these last March, March of 22. So this is an outdated rate sheet. You would want to be sure you're obtaining the current one. You can see here that there's a service availability charge, there's an energy charge, and then a peak capacity charge that is only billed during summer months of June to September. So we're going to have to put in summer months, and we're going to have 2 rates on our HUD model. The fuel cost factor is not always on the rate sheet because it changes. So you either need to locate it on the provider's website or through email. CPS puts it on their website under the How to Understand My Bill section, and you're going to want to use the total so that you can use this in extra charges. So let's put that together in the HUD model. We've got the date, We've got the utility provider, the name of the rate plan, and the effective date. We've got our summer months, so we've put in June to September. We've got $875 as our monthly charge. And the blocks in the summer rate plan, 600 of the kilowatt hours are billed at one rate, and then over that is billed at a higher rate. So we've got that outlined there. And then there's the two different rates. And then in winter, it's just the one rate. So we'll do remainder and then the rate amount. And then in extra charges, we're going to put that fuel regulatory adjustment factor amount. And then in taxes, we're going to put the taxes. And right now, I don't believe San Antonio charges city taxes. So it's just going to be the population and the PUC tax. So that's what that all looks like put side by side. And then trash, we're going to get that from the website. And we can see here that it is trash. It's available. We're going to do the total city services for the smallest one, and that's $18. I do see that that's taxable. So if I did not add taxes for the purposes of this training, but if you know what the taxes are, maybe you've got a vacant unit bill or something, you can add those taxes in and submit that bill as evidence for the backup to those tax rates. But I think it's usually 8 1/4. So the trash fees, you're just going to put them in at what the rate is. So on this one, all unit size is 18. We're not going to decide, do they get a small, medium, or large? We're going to go with the smallest, or if there's a residential rate for 2 containers, we're going to use the one for 1. We're not going to add more. That would be up to the tenant, but the minimum is what we're going to include. That's going to go in the trash collection part of the tariff, or of the rate plan sheet. Rate plan section. You can see here, water and sewer not applicable, tenant pays trash. That is not where you would put your valet trash fees. If you guys are requiring valet trash, that is a non-optional fee that you would charge and you would include in the gross rent calculation. That is not a part of your utility allowance. You think they would include that as utility allowance when they go post 15? Yeah. I agree. So if you are post 15, then valet trash would be part of your utility allowance, but until then, that's like an allocated fee, and that is just going to be a non-optional fee that you add on to your gross rent calculation. So we're looking here, we've got our building type, we've got our utility allowance schedule, standard utility tariff, we don't have a green discount, and then we've got our fuel sources for all of our required items listed here. This is an all-electric unit where the tenant also pays trash. So this is what this looks like on the actual HUD model page. So again, you can clear the data that's not applicable. Make sure you don't accidentally remove a line that matters. So if you take out water heating and you're not supposed to take out water heating, and we issue it with water heating, you don't be surprised. That's an easy thing to say, oh, crud, I forgot to take that out, or I accidentally took that out. The bottom number in the yellow line is the utility allowance for that sized unit to be used in the gross rent calculation. Here are the links to the different things that you just saw me use for these HUD models. The taxes are available on 3 different websites. There's a base tax rate for all of Texas. Then there's a tax rate based on population. And then there's a table that shows the cities that charge a tax on the residential use of gas and electricity. If your city's not on that, don't include those taxes. If you include them, Nicole, Carolyn, and I are going to go, maybe there was an election and this changed and now they have to include it, and we're going to include it. We try to keep up to date on those things, but if you notice that we're not including it and we should, or we're including it and we shouldn't, reach out to me and say, hey, I think this might need to be updated. Abilene doesn't charge us tax anymore, or Abilene does charge a tax, whatever the case may be. We're not in it to try to like create something that's not realistic, but we are trying to do the best with, what we've got, and sometimes we miss something on a website update. The last link shows the applicable tax rate for all the cities and counties in Texas. You do not have to send that to us. You do not have to send us the whole list. If you want to just send us the page that your city shows up on and the page that your city's taxes are on, that's fine. If you don't send us anything for the taxes, that's fine. We know where to get all of this, and we use this when we do your HUD models. Here's what those look like. That first one is the required Public utility gross receipts assessment. So that's the tax, that's the percentage that's there. And then here are the percentages that go based on population. And then here's an example of the Texas sales and use rates. This is from October 2020, so not current. These two are current still. And so this shows what the rates are for counties and cities. And so if you're a city in, or if you're a county and you've got two different cities, you might have a different city rate for each city. So you want to be sure that you're taking a look at that and using the most applicable rate. So I told you early on we were going to talk about building types. Do we have any questions so far? I haven't seen anything pop up, so I'm assuming everybody's either with us or has fallen asleep. So there's two different HUD documents that we use when determining building types. The one on the left that has the blue Housing and Urban Development logo in the middle, that's kind of the longer version. And then HUD shortened it and said, here's what we're going to use. So you can see on this right-hand document, current model unit types, it's got 5 options and what they are and what they correspond with. So if you're looking and you're like, oh, I have a townhouse. Well, that goes with number 3. So we're going to go up here and say, oh, that's single family attached. Garden and high-rise apartments, that's 5+. So we're going to go to 5+. Detached houses is 2. That's easy. If you have manufactured homes, then that would be under mobile homes, and that's an option on the HUD model as well. So if you're not sure your building type, this is what to reference, and that is in the handout as well. So here's kind of a closer look at this. So you can see that this is the 5 basic ones, and everything falls into one of those. No, it's not perfect, but it's what we have to go on, and it's what we're going to use. And the biggest discrepancy that we have is multifamily 2 to 4 versus a 4-plex or versus apartments 5+. If it's a 4-plex where there's 4 units that all are in a square or they're line by line, that's a 4-plex. That's not 2 to 4. If it's 2 units with 2 more units on top, that's multifamily 2 to 4. Or if it's an apartment with another apartment on top of it, that's multifamily 2 to 4. Other than that, it's going to be one of the other requirements. That multifamily 2 to 4 is actually a very rare building type in my experience. If the multi-story building where the units are on top of other units has less than 5 units, the department will calculate based on low-rise 2 to 4. If the multi-story building where there's units on top of other units has 5 or more units, we're going to calculate it on apartments 5+. If we see that you put low-rise 2 to 4, we might go online and look at pictures to see, is this really low-rise 2 to 4, or is this supposed to be a 4-plex, or should it be 5+, whatever the case may be. And we're going to save that picture, and we're going to issue it based off of what we were able to find. If we have, I know when I've gotten tenant complaints, I will sometimes ask, because this has come up as an issue, and I will ask you for a photo of the buildings. And if you send it to me and it's very obviously 4-plexes, I'm going to reissue that utility allowance based off of that. So if you're not sure what your building type is, feel free to send us a picture of it and we will help you. If you've got kind of a funky building type, reach out. We would rather talk about it ahead of time and have that documentation that we can save versus you sending something in and kind of getting blindsided. I put that on Do Not Disturb. It didn't work. So for developments with multifamily direct loan funds issued by the department, you can use any methodology except the Public Housing Authority. Buildings for which the only source of MFDL funding is home ARP and which contain no home max units may use PHA, but it has to be submitted initially and annually for approval. Multifamily direct loan developments cannot combine methodologies. You must use the department issued and approved utility allowance for all units, even voucher holders. The housing tax credit buildings in which there are units under the multifamily direct loan programs are considered HUD regulated buildings, and the MFDL utility allowance will be the allowance for all units in the building, regardless of the resident being on the MFDL program. Developments with multifamily direct loan funds that are not issued by the department must use the utility allowance that is approved for their MFDL funds. So if you have City of Houston home funds, you're going to have to use that for the buildings where those home units are. The housing tax credit buildings in which there are units under the MFDL programs are considered HUD regulated, And the multifamily direct loan utility allowance will be the allowance for all units in the building, regardless of the resident being on the MFDL program. The department will issue a utility allowance if annual review is not received by October 1st for any property that has department-issued multifamily direct loan funds. We will look at the annual owner's compliance report, the last entrance interview questionnaire, or we'll contact the owner if we're not sure what utilities need to be included. This is more the case for newer properties than for existing properties. For existing stuff, we've probably done these for a couple of years at least, and we've got these kind of established. Utilities will be evaluated. For regulated utilities, the department will contact the provider directly and apply charges that are in effect no later than 60 days before the allowance will be effective. For deregulated utilities, the department is going to use the Power to Choose website and search available providers by zip code. The plan chosen will then be the median cost per kilowatt hour based on the average price per kilowatt hour for the average monthly use of 1,000 kilowatt hours. So we're going to sort that spreadsheet, and then we're going to average that 1,000 kilowatt hour column, and we're going to use the median of that that column. We're not going to, not average, I said that wrong, I apologize. We're going to use the median from that 1,000 kilowatt hour column. The department will then notify the owner in CMTS of the new allowance. We will upload a letter that says you have 30 days to implement this. We will not call you, we will not email you, we will not reach out. You need to be watching your CMTS, and if this is uploaded, you need to know that you've got 30 days to implement that. Again, you have a 5-day period to report errors that are related to the physical characteristics of the building. So if we send you this and you say, wait, we have a boiler system, we don't have water heaters in our apartments, you need to reach out within 5 days so that we can get that remedied. And then again, the allowance must be implemented for rent due in all program units 30 days after the department notifies the owner of the allowance. So we don't start these until after October 1st. So if we get it out to you end of October, you're going to have a 30-day window for the end of November. So effectively, December rents are going to be restricted using that new utility allowance. For utility allowances after the compliance period, utilities paid to the owner are accounted for in the utility allowance. So for TCAP, exchange, bond, and state housing trust fund developments layered with housing tax credits, no longer in the compliance period, you will also include utilities paid to the owner as part of the utility allowance. So if you have that valet trash or you have that allocated water and sewer, you will include that in the utility allowance at that point. The tenant paid portion of the rent plus the applicable utility allowance must not exceed the rent limit for that unit size and designation. It is the owner's responsibility to ensure that all rents are properly restricted. So what that means is if the development bills water and sewer based on a RUB system during the compliance period, this is a non-optional fee and must be taken into account on the monthly rent calculation. However, once the compliance period is over, this now becomes part of the utility allowance and is no longer considered a non-optional fee. Failure to do this will result in non-compliance. If you don't know when your property's compliance period is up, you need to reach out to a monitor. If you think it's up at the end of 2022 and you start doing this in 2023 and your compliance period's not actually up till 2023, you've got an issue of non-compliance because of that. So reach out to a monitor to look at what your compliance period term is, and we can help you find that if you're not sure how to calculate that yourself. For changes in the utility allowance, an owner may not change methodologies or the utilities that a resident is financially responsible for without prior written department approval. The department will review all requests with the exception of actual use methodology within 90 days. If the owner fails to post the notice and the residents and simultaneously submit the request to the department by the beginning of the 90-day period, the approval or denial will be delayed for up to 90 days. So if you don't do that, I might put in the letter that your resident posting was this date, but you didn't submit to the department until 2 months later. So your rent cannot, or your utility allowance cannot be implemented for an additional 2 months from what you originally thought you were going to implement it. Once approval to start or stop charging for a utility is received, owners must implement the change in utilities charged at the time of each household's lease renewal and no sooner. So if you are requesting to charge water and sewer, you need to not do that until those lease renewals come up. If you request to charge water and sewer and then it turns out you never implement that as an owner, or your owner never implements that, you need to request to have that taken back off your utility allowance because that was approved. So now you need to request to remove that. Some requirements for annual review: the rural housing and HUD utility allowances, you're going to review with them. PHA method, you need to check periodically, but you don't have to submit. But when one is made effective, it must be implemented for rent due 90 days after the effective date. For home ARP developments, they have to submit for annual reviews, so they'll need to watch their utility allowances. And if it's a home ARP deal that's in the city of Austin, and Austin releases theirs in June, maybe that's when that home ARP deal submits. They don't wait until October. Written local estimate, HUD utility schedule model, and energy consumption model require annual review. They must be submitted to the department no later than October 1st. And then the actual use method must be submitted no later than August 1st. A utility allowance is considered implemented once the unit status report is updated and rents are restricted. Failure to submit for annual review, with the exception of those multifamily direct loan developments, if an owner fails to submit for annual review during the calendar year, the development's utility allowance will default to the applicable PHA allowance. If the development is located in an area that does not have a PHA, the development fails to have a properly calculated utility allowance and we cannot test for rents. The utility allowance for MFDL developments that fail to submit for annual review will be calculated as we talked about just a few slides ago. It is an issue of non-compliance if the development fails to submit for annual review of the utility allowance. The purpose of this requirement is to allow the department to test for gross rent issues at the time of a monitoring review. So this doesn't negate that finding of non-compliance. This simply creates a utility allowance that we can use for testing purposes. For combining methods, you guys can combine methods in most cases as long as you don't have a HUD regulated building. So if you want to have electricity done as through the HUD model and then use the PHA for the gas portion, you can do that. But you've got two separate reporting requirements and two separate review requirements and implementation requirements. Again, rural housing and HUD regulated buildings are not allowed to combine methodologies. If there are multiple HUD programs in a building, if the building is covered by multifamily notice H-2015-4, which addresses project-based section 8, or receives assistance from rural housing, the applicable UA for every rent restricted unit is the UA issued by that program. If the building has department MFDL funds, the applicable UA for every rent restricted unit is the UA approved by the department as per the TAC. This is true even if the building also has project-based vouchers and public housing. If the building has multiple HUD programs that are not covered by 2015-4, like public housing or project-based vouchers, and the building does not have department MFDL funds, it is up to the owner to say which UA they are using. Tenants with housing choice vouchers in a HUD regulated building will not use the voucher UA. They will use the UA approved by the HUD program. I know that was a lot, so if you have these HUD programs and you're not sure how this works for your property, reach out. This is a little easier to look at property specific. CDBG funds at the property do not make the buildings HUD regulated. Some municipalities are issuing UA approvals with this funding, but they are not applicable to department programs. So if you have CDBG funds from the city of Houston, for example, and you have department home funds, you're going to have to kind of answer to two entities. You're going to have to, on your unit status report and stuff for us, it's going to have the utility allowance we approved and issued. For your CDBG, you're going to have to do that, and rents are going to have to be restricted under both programs. So you may have a lower rent because of that CDBG fund or a lower rent because of that home fund if it's lower than the others. Do you want me to look at the question and read it? Okay, then I'm going to leave it alone. So at application, if the application includes rural housing, that's going to be the applicable UA. If the application includes HUD regulated buildings for a HUD program, that's going to be the applicable UA. If it's for an MFDL funds from the department, then applicants need to calculate the UA in accordance with TAC 614 3B, C, or D, which is written local estimate, energy consumption, actual use, and the HUD model. Home ARP is the only one that can use the PHA schedule under that MFDL funding umbrella. If the application includes federal funds from a unit of local government, but no MFDL from the department, applicants are required to request in writing the UA from the awarding jurisdiction. If you're going to have buildings that have no federal funds from that other entity, you need a UA from us for the buildings without it, and a UA from them for the buildings with it. For everything else, you're going to submit the required items to the compliance division UA team. We're going to calculate a review and allowance within 21 days, but no earlier than 90 days from when the application is due. And there's a specific email address for those. Requests not submitted to this email address will not be recognized. You will include the application questionnaire for utilities along with all required backup based on the methodology. If owners want to change to a UA other than what was used for underwriting, the owner must submit documentation for department approval at a minimum 90 days prior to the commencement of leasing activities. The owner is not required to review the utility allowances or implement new allowances until the building has achieved 90% occupancy for a period of 90 days or the end of the first year of the credit period, whichever is earlier. But once a request to change the utility allowance is approved or implemented, the utility allowance used at underwriting is no longer valid. So if you submit a lease-up request, you've now initiated that annual review requirement. Okay. So any new requests for resources on existing properties, either additional funds or tax credits or a reallocation of funds or a resyndication or MFDL funds or something like that, that has an existing department LURA, you have to use the method that's in effect on the existing development. If the owner wishes to change, or if for an MFDL application is required to change the method, say your existing development uses PHA, you're applying for new funds, and now you've got an MFDL award application, you're going to have to switch to the HUD model. You're going to make that request at the existing development CMTS account, and then I'm going to approve that in the application side and the existing development side. You also need to email the application email address that's on the slide prior and say, hey, I have a new allocation of funds for this property. I've uploaded the attachment into CMTS, or I've had the owner upload it. Please review and respond, and I will respond accordingly. All requests described in the presentation, other than those for applications, must be complete and uploaded directly to the CMTS account using utility allowance as the type and utility allowance as the TDHCA contact. The department will not be able to approve requests that are incomplete and or not submitted correctly. If you have 811 funds from the department, you must upload those to the attention of Bill Craner or follow whatever policy is in place from that 811 team. I'm not going to issue an approval for 811 stuff. So you're going to have two different packets that you've got to submit, one for the 811 group and one for our stuff, or for the multifamily programs. For owners participating in the Section 811 Project Rental Assistance Program, the owner may choose the methodology they wish to use. The rules for the chosen method must be followed. On an annual basis, the development will submit a utility allowance update to the 811 division. The 811 division will then issue an approved rent schedule once that submission is reviewed. The allowance listed on the rent schedule only applies to the 811 units. 811 for the elections that we as the department made for the 811 program, that does not make the entire building HUD regulated. So this is only going to apply to those 811 units. So here, decline. Sorry about that. So here are the two questionnaires, and we've had some questions from people at other trainings that wanted to go through these line by line. Do you think we should take a break before we start this, or just keep going? I know this is kind of running long because I've added stuff to it. if you need a break and you missed something, please just let us know, or I'll go back. This is not a problem. So for the questionnaire, you can see that first paragraph tells you to contact me with any questions. And then that bold paragraph tells you how to upload. And then you're going to put the name of the development. And there's CMTS ID and the address. And the zip code and the city, and we're in Travis County. Then you're going to select your funding source from the drop down. And then you're going to put your file number. If you have multiples, you can do multiples. And the type of request is either going to be annual review, request to switch, or initial review. So we're going to say annual. The utility is electric, and the source is going to be Austin Energy. The effective date, if we're doing it today, July, August, September. Oh, this is the current one, so we're going to say 22. See, good thing y'all are with me. I wouldn't have caught that. So this is about the current utility allowance method, and we're using the HUD model. And we only charge electric. So now for the new one, we're going to still only charge electric. And we're going to go to Austin Energy, and it's going to be 9/5/2023. We're going to keep using the HUD model. But if we were going to switch, that's where you would tell us that you're switching. So now we're going to go here. If the request is a review of the current methodology, were the annual review requirements met last year? If you did not submit in 2022, then your answer is no. If you did submit in 2022, then your answer is yes. If no, please select a reason. Implemented at least that first year due, received initial approval to switch last year. If neither of those applies, then leave that blank and you can write something out here. You can include a cover sheet, whatever works for you. The beginning of the 90-day approval period is 7/6/2023. Has the proposed utility allowance been posted in a common area? We're going to say yes, because we did. As of what date? We're posting it today. And it's going to be for rents due after 9/5/2023. I don't know if that's exactly 90 days, but it's close enough. No, it's not. That's 60 days. July to August, August, September, September, October. So we're going to do 10/5/2023. Does the development have USDA rural development? No. Is the building HUD regulated? I'm going to say no. Does the development have home funds from a participating jurisdiction? We're going to say no, but if we had them, it would be city of or whatever. And does at least one unit have, or each building have at least one? We'd say yes or no. That's going to determine what kind of approval or denial we get. Building type, it has multiple selections, but if you do any of these three, it's going to be single family attached, and then there's apartments 5+, multifamily 2 to 4, or detached houses. So we're going to say this is 5+. We're going to come here. There's no gas. Tenant pays electric, water, sewer, and trash are owner paid. Everything in our community is electric, and it's electric resistance. This one's going to be NA. This is paid directly to the provider. This is NA because the tenant doesn't pay it. And so really you could leave the rest of those, and these are, we're going to say sub-meters, because the electric, every unit has its own meter. So those we would leave alone. And then we're going to submit the current UA, the new UA and backup, and the posted notice. And then I'm going to put my name, and I'm going to put 7/6/2023. My title is compliance. Company name is Poli Management. Phone number is 512-475-3821. And my email address is karapoli@tdhca.state.tx.us. Hopefully that helps. I see somebody has their hand raised. We're not unmuting folks in the interest of time. But if you have a question, you can put it in the questions box. So that's the questionnaire for existing developments. And then the questionnaire for applications is going to be kind of the same. We're going to say Pandora Springs. HTC file, maybe we have one, maybe we don't. City is Austin. My A is not working. County is Travis. Zip code is 78711. Are you applying for multifamily direct loans with TDHCA? You're either going to say no, or you're going to select the type that you're applying for. So we are going to apply for home. And then are you applying for funds from another jurisdiction? No. Will there be HUD regulated buildings other than those HUD regulated by the MFDL funding? No. If you have a HUD loan, but you will not have HUD funding on your property, that does not make it HUD regulated. If you mark yes on this, I'm going to reach out by email and say, hey, I need a whole lot more information on this before I can approve it. Will there be rural housing? The answer is no. What methodology are you requesting? If you're requesting the actual use method, that's only going to be really applicable if you've got like a phase 1 and you're building phase 2 exactly the same. So we're going to let you use phase 1 data. So actual use of an application, you need to reach out to me, but these others would be acceptable. So we're going to say we're going to use energy consumption model, and there's no gas, it's all electric, owner pays water, sewer, trash, everything is electric, it's resistance. So this one's going to be NA. Electric, we're going to say yes, it's paid to or through the owner or directly to the provider. NA, NA, NA. And for this one, we're going to say it has individual submeters so that we know it is based on actual usage. You're going to tell us your building type, and you're going to tell us what size units you have. And that's pretty much it. The change that we made to this one was so that owners could tell us what type of funding they were applying for with the MFDL program from the department, because that was turning into a little bit of a confusion issue that I was unable to really assist with when we were doing the application reviews. If you have a question about an application or how to answer a question, reach out. We're happy to help. Some keys to success are always upload utility allowance submission to the attention of utility allowance on the TDHCA contact list. Review the UA submission prior to upload. Is it complete? Is it accurate? Are there any pages missing? Does the posting have the right dates and amounts and unit sizes? Upload all required items for the methodology chosen. Make sure you're using the most current forms available on the department website. Email a member of the UA team prior to submission if you have a question. And remember, utility allowances are building rules or follow building rules, and they are not a property rule or a unit rule. They are a building rule. We are here to help. Again, that's the UA team. It's myself, Carolyn Metzger, and Nicole Martinez. And we are all happy to help anytime. You can email us. If one of us is out, we usually will forward it to the other one, or you can reach out to another one, or you can copy all three of us at a time, and we will, whoever kind of play heads up, 7-up, and whoever gets it first wins the prize and gets to answer the question. Remember, your utility allowance review is due by October 1st. If you're using actual use, it's due by August 1st. That's all I have, folks. If you have questions, I can stick around. I think I have the room and the webinar platform until 11. I am happy to help further. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. And I thank you for joining us today. There will be a survey when you close out. Please answer those questions. Be honest. Tell me what you want to know about in future trainings. Tell me what you missed from this one. I will reach out if there's questions that didn't get answered. And I appreciate the feedback. Otherwise, thanks again. Have a great day. I'll hang out for just a minute and see if any questions come through, and then I'll close it here in just a little bit if nothing comes through. Have a great day, guys. All right, I am not seeing any questions come through. If you have any questions, please, as always, feel free to reach out by email I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, and we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to y'all again soon. Bye.